Hi, my name is Nancy. Welcome to my channel Running with Scissors. In today's video, I'm going to give you an update on how my birthday collection's coming along. And I will have to tell you, I had one that came out great, one that came out so-so, and one was a big fat flop. Also, as promised, my college roommate from way back in the 70s is here, and she's going to show you some examples of her paper crafting. If that sounds interesting to you, don't go away. First, I'd like to thank Jen from Today in Jen's Sewing Room for starting this hashtag so we can all get together on Fridays to share our makes, what we want to make, and a little bit about life in between. Okay, last week I talked about my birthday collection, and I already showed you this dress, and I'll just show it to you really quickly again. I showed this to you last week. It is from an Ellie & Mac Monday Morning Dress Pattern, and I showed this to you last week. And this one came out very, very, very nice. And then remember last week, I showed you this top that I made. This is the one I had trouble with because I had to have Grace help me make it. And it came out really nice. And I mentioned that I wanted to make a pair of pants to go with this top. And so let me show you what I made. And this came out great. I made the pants from a New Look 6292, the pants that the model is wearing. And this is really a good pattern for a beginner. It's just three pieces, the front, the back, and just the band where you put the elastic in. No pockets. Of course, you can add pockets. And this was the fabric I found. Let me get a little closer, that had a really nice texture. It went together so quick. I made it in a day. I actually traced out the pattern, cut out the fabric, and sewed it all in one day. Not all in one stretch. I did a little throughout the day, but they went together so nice. I cut out a size 16, and they fit great, and I'm really, really happy with them. And I think this will look really pretty. Let me just hold them up with my top. Now, this was my success story. Then I decided, let me grab it. I wanted to make some pajamas. And I'm making it out of this New Look 6404. It says his and hers easy. The tops are supposed to be made out of a knit. And then the little shorts, they recommend that you use a woven. Okay, so I made the top, but it's kind of big. I mean, it looks fine. I mean, it's sewed up nice. I sewed a large based on my measurements, but it is really, really big. But I'm going to sleep in it, so I think it'll be fine for sleeping. It'll be nice and comfy. It's nice and loose, and I think it's okay. I think if I ever make this for an actual top to wear outside, I will definitely size down because that is pretty big. But I thought it came out pretty, and I do like the fabric. Now, I had decided, instead of trying to make these little shorts out of a woven, I thought I'm going to go ahead and try and make them out of the same fabric as I made the top. Well, let me tell you. I think what happened was it started wrong from the beginning. You know, when you cut out your pants or your shorts, you cut out two bottoms, or two backs and two fronts. Okay, two backs and two fronts. And their directions will tell you, sew the back to the front, the back to the front. Well, I am positive that I sewed the front to the front and the back to the back. And that's where it all went wrong. That's where it all went downhill. It never looked right. I'd sew it and said, what's wrong? And then I even had to cut out a seam because it didn't look right. I tried everything. I mean, it was just a disaster from the beginning. So then I decided I was going to try and, fold down, to put my little channel to put in the elastic. And I couldn't use my Brother machine because the machine likes to kind of grab the fabric and kind of grab onto it, even using a walking foot. Then I thought, well, I have used my serger and stretched the elastic around and sewed it on that way when you disengage the knife. And that actually was going fairly well. And I hadn't gone very far, about this far, and heard a big clunk. Something hit me in the head. The left needle broke and flew and hit me in the head. It's a wonder it didn't hit me in the eye. And that's when I said, I'm done. no more. And besides that, when I held it up, the legs didn't match, and it was, well, that's the pocket hanging out. I'm probably going to take this, deconstruct it, and make something else out of it. I think this is it. I'm done. This goes to prove that sewing doesn't always come easy. And I've made shorts. You saw the pants I made. I know how to make them. I've got a pair of shorts that came out great. But every once in a while you get a pattern and either you're not paying attention, or I'm going to blame my roommate.
My fault.
She just said it's her fault because we were talking and everything. But I don't know. I do think that the problem was cutting out the pieces right, but not putting them together. Like I said, I put the two fronts together, the backs together, and then it just, like I said, fell apart after that. So don't expect to, when you watch my channel, to find out, oh, everything comes out good for her. No, it does not.
The legend is, don't have your college roommate that you haven't seen 15 years come and visit with you while you're trying to sew because you'll get distracted.
Right. So that's what I did. What I'm going to next, I'm going to introduce you to my college roommate, and she'll explain to you what it is she's going to show you. So don't go away. Okay, as I promised you from last week, my college roommate, who I've not seen in about 15, 16 years, came to visit me, and she only lives an hour away, so we have no excuse, other than we were busy with work, family, life. So she came up to visit a few days, and she does a lot of paper crafting. But I'm going to have her explain to you what exactly it is that she does, and then we've got a really cool demonstration of what the things that she does. So come on in, Karen. Say hi to my viewers.
Hello, viewers.
And as I said, she's going to show you what she does. Tell them exactly what it is you do, because I don't get it myself.
Back around 95, 96. I was practicing medicine and my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And I was pregnant. And you can't be pregnant with a husband with cancer and a 15-month-old toddler. So I closed my medical practice and became a caregiver at home and a mommy. And when my daughter was in kindergarten, I had a Daisy Girl Scout troop. And one of my Daisy Girl Scouts' mother had a Stampin' Up! Party and invited me, and I was introduced to rubber stamping. So I bought a simple stamp set and made my Christmas cards that year, and I was hooked. So while my husband was alive, I became an avid card maker. I collected supplies, and I had a stamping room, and my room is full of stamping supplies as Nancy's room is full of sewing supplies. My husband passed away in 2008, and he's in heaven with the Lord. I feel good about where he is, but I became a single parent with a need for an income, so I returned to practice in medicine. Well, I was working from 6 in the morning until midnight and sleeping 6 hours and trying to take care of kids, and so a decade went by and I didn't touch anything. Well, in 2020, I'd had enough. I had turned 65 and was eligible for Social Security and Medicare, and I said it was time to retire, and I turned in my resignation, and 2 weeks later they shut down the world. So I think that God knew the perfect time for me to stop my active practice, and I was a retiree. Well, it took me 6 months to clean out my craft room because it had become a junk room, and you couldn't even walk in the room because everything that needed a place to get put or shoved got shoved into my room. Well, 6 months later, I liberated my craft space and started crafting again. Making cards changed dramatically from when I stopped in 2008 to when I picked it back up in 2022. They started using designer paper. They started using die cuts. They started using embossing. These were things that I had never tried before back when I was active with the hobby. And I thought, boy, an embossing machine or a die cut machine is a pretty pricey tool. I don't know that I need that. But I had all this time, and so I started watching videos online and started to see all the different things that someone could do with an embossing machine. So I kind of thought, well, maybe it might be worth a try, and I bought an inexpensive machine and started playing with it, and I was amazed. And my demonstration today is to show you all the things that you can do with an embossing machine. And if I don't convince you by the time I'm done with my demonstration that it isn't just a one tool for one technique, that your techniques that you can do with this machine are limited only by your imagination. And I think Nancy will reference what you should look up if you're interested in pursuing a craft like this. But all you'd have to do is Google online die cut / embossing machine, and you'll find anything from a $50 machine to one that costs $200. You just need something simple and basic. And many companies make the embossing folders that you use in the craft. But I'm going to just show you some samples of things that I played with. And for me, it was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoy it.
All right, here we go. Stay tuned.
It's going. Okay. I'm going to show you my demonstration now. But over time, being retired, I watched a lot of videos on YouTube, so I saw that embossing folders were able to do an awful lot of things. And I thought, well, maybe. And I ended up buying a machine. And when I first started, I was just doing plain embossing, and I was excited about that. But with time, I explored to see what exactly this machine can do. And this video today is going to show some of the simple things that you can do with an embossing machine in one folder. Every single sample that I have today is the same embossing folder, and it's a 3D embossing folder. Embossing folders come in 2D, which are not as deep an impression, and 3D, which is a deeper impression. So as I go through the samples, I'm going to tell you the material that's made and whether it's an embossed or a debossed pattern. Embossed is the raised pattern, and debossed is the recessed pattern. So our first sample here is just traditional embossing of a colored cardstock. This is embossed, this is debossed. This is doing the exact same technique, just using white paper, embossed and debossed. This third series is using colored vellum. This is light pink vellum, and the card that I mounted it on is a variegated card, so you can see different shades from darker pink to lighter pink behind the vellum. But this is the embossed image, and this is the debossed image. Now this second sheet, I used metallic cardstock, and we have an embossed image and a debossed image in silver. And here it is, the same thing in gold with embossed and debossed. And then I tried it on wallpaper, and you have an embossed image and a debossed image. And they all look a little bit different based on the material and whether it's embossed or debossed. This panel, I used designer series paper in the first column. Many designer series papers are double-sided, and so you could take one piece and emboss it through the machine, and you're going to see both impressions and choose the side that you want. But this is older scrapbook paper, so it's only one-sided. So I embossed it and I debossed it here. I saw someone use fun foam. Now, if you're going to use fun foam, it's probably nice to take a hairdryer or a heating tool and heat up the foam before you do it. I did not do that in this sample because if the foam is soft, it'll take the impression better. But this is an embossed piece of fun foam. I saw someone's video where they used washi tape, and I was impressed that washi tape took such a deep impression with the folder. Because washi tape is a tape on a roll, you have to apply it to a base, and this washi tape in these three samples here was just applied to a piece of scrap paper. It was probably an envelope that I cut apart and just used an old envelope and applied the washi tape to the envelope. So here you have a sample where I alternated different widths and the blue and green color. And here I did a full face front with blue, which is embossed. And here I just used green and it's debossed. Here again, this is an embossed image. You can see that the image is elevated. Okay, I was playing. Washi tape worked. This was my idea. I took packing tape and just applied a piece of packing tape to copy paper. And then I ran it through the embossing machine. And it's neat because it's shiny like glossy paper would be. And it took the impression really well. So this is an embossed packing tape and this is debossed. A lot of times people don't know what to do with their scraps, and if you have an embossing machine, it's a great way to use up the scraps that you've accumulated from your other card making. All I did was take a piece of copy paper or a piece of envelope that I cut down to card front size, and just using a glue stick, I glued down strips a 1/2 inch wide of designer series paper and then ran that through the machine. So this is designer series paper run through the machine, and this is an embossed image. I don't have one here in my presentation, but you could choose to run it through the debossed, to deboss the image instead of emboss, but I don't have one made that way. This is the same concept, only using strips of cardstock. Glued down to a piece of copy paper so that you have one piece and then run through the machine. This is an embossed image. Likewise, you could choose to deboss this image. Another way you can use your scraps up is to cut them into squares and glue them down on a piece of copy paper or scrap paper, an envelope. I love to cut apart my old envelopes because it's my way of recycling, and I'm not throwing it in the garbage dump. I'm using it as a base for my scraps of cardstock. This is a sample where it was one piece of designer paper that was double-sided, and I showed both sides of the paper by alternating the squares in a quilt-like pattern. And this technique here is called faux quilt, because it tends to look like a quilt. Now the image here is embossed, but you could do the same thing and choose to deboss it. Down here, I used single-sided scrapbook paper and chose different colors that coordinated and debossed the image. And this one I just chose to mount it on another piece of cardstock to give a little edge. Okay. Now, if you're wondering how do you choose, well, what did I do with that? Technical problem. There we go. There we go, fixed. That was a simple fix. When you're looking at an embossing folder, it has two sides. One side is elevated and the other side is recessed. So when you're choosing to deboss, you're wanting to focus on the recessed image. So you put the side of your item that you're embossing away from the recess so that when you run it through the machine, the side that you want to look at is going to be recessed. If you're wanting the image to be embossed, you put the side of the paper that you want to see away from the raised side, and after you run it through the machine, that will be elevated. And if you've never played with an embossing machine, after you've done it a few times, you'll figure that out naturally, because when you take the piece of paper out, you'll see that the side of the paper facing the recessed is going to be elevated. The side of the paper that's facing the elevated is going to be recessed. Okay, the next thing I played with, and I saw someone else demonstrate this, was aluminum foil. These two samples are aluminum foil. This one is an embossed image. This is a debossed image. Now, when I ran this through the machine, this one I just ran the aluminum foil through the machine by itself, and it didn't take the image as crisply. This one I chose to attach the aluminum foil to a piece of copy paper, and it took the impression better because it had more substance. The thicker the item that you're sending through the machine is going to take the image a little bit better than a thinner item. But you can use all weights of aluminum foil. You can use the really thin aluminum foil, or you can use heavy duty. This was a pie pan. It was a lid to one of those tin foil things you can buy in the grocery store that are disposable. And I just cut apart the lid and ran it through the embossing machine. And this had fell apart, so I can show you. It's much thicker and more substance than aluminum foil, but it's embossable. And so this one I embossed and took advantage of the raised side. Now, if you see from the back, you can see that it's going to deboss too, and you just choose which side you want. So this is an embossed specimen, and this is a debossed, and this is just a metal pie pan, the equivalent of a metal pie pan, or anything that is that weight of metal. And I lost my... Okay, the next, the next series of items that I played with were acetate sheets or cellophane. You can emboss any weight of acetate. And depending upon how heavy duty the acetate is, or the window sheet, some of us make window cards, shaker cards, the heavier duty is going to take a deeper impression. You can run the acetate or the window sheet through the embossing folder by itself, or you can choose to attach it to cardstock and have that extra substance behind it to give it a deeper impression. On these images, let me see. This was a heavier duty embossed that I just mounted on, well, I ran it through the machine with a piece of cardstock behind it. And so it took the impression pretty well. This one was a piece of colored acetate that I ran through the machine, and I debossed it. You can emboss waxed paper. Now the first sample here, I ran the wax paper through the machine just by itself, and it did take the impression, but it's very fragile because it's not very thick. In the second column, I did the exact same thing, but before I ran it through the machine, I attached it to a piece of colored cardstock. These are both attached to a lavender piece of cardstock, and you can see, although both of them are waxed paper, the impression is much more defined than here. And you see the same thing with the debossing. Just adding a little piece of paper behind that wax paper changes the image dramatically. The next item that I pulled out of my kitchen was parchment paper. And just like the wax paper, you can choose to emboss the parchment paper with or without a base. Now this upper one, I ran the parchment through the machine without a base. The lower one, which is the debossed image, I ran after I attached it to a piece of cardstock. You can see here, I got cardstock underneath it. I attached it and ran it through the machine, and it gave it a little bit deeper impression. But if it's thin like paper or cardstock, you can run it through your machine. These next two items, I went into my wrapping paper and grabbed some colored tissue paper. Both of these I attached to a base before I ran them through, because you know tissue paper is very thin. This is an embossed purple tissue paper, and this was a debossed red tissue paper. And these are things that we all have in our stash. It's like a free card because you've already got the supplies. The middle column is brown packing paper. And the image here at the top and this at the bottom, I ran through the machine just as the packing paper. The upper image is embossed, the lower image is debossed. But then I went back and attached the brown paper to a piece of cardstock and ran it through. And you can see how much more defined the elevated impression is if it had a little bit of cardstock behind it. See the difference? These are both embossed images, but this is much sharper. The next thing I tried was a paper napkin. How many pretty napkins do we get at baby showers and bridal showers and birthday parties and holiday parties. This is just a plain yellow napkin from a fast food place. And you can see how pretty it turned out. This was attached to a base so that it gave a more elevated impression. The next thing I tried playing with was labels. All I did was take the sheet of labels and attach them to a cardstock base and run it through the machine. And later on I'll show you how you can apply color to this, but this is just white, but it gives a very striking image, because when you see this in person, you can see all the different patterns of the flowers on the different labels, and I think it has an interesting effect. Okay. The next thing I did was go back. I used vellum. And you can buy vellum, just plain white vellum. You can buy vellum that is colored. You can buy vellum that has a pattern on it. Any of those are embossable. The first column here is pink vellum that I embossed. This is the embossed image up here and the debossed here. The second column, I used white vellum, but I mounted it before I embossed it to purple cardstock. So you can see, while the image takes well on the vellum, just adding it to a layer of cardstock before you run it through the machine gives it a little bit deeper impression. I think that the embossing is a little clearer on this sample than it is on the first column. This third column here, I guess this was mounted also. This was mounted. This is vellum that was not mounted to anything before run through the machine. And while you can see it quite distinctively, and you can see through the vellum to pick up the color of the cardstock base, the image is crisper when it had a base behind it. Now, those of you that are sewing aficionados, you'll like this one. This is embossed fabric. I don't know whether you can see the texture there. It shows up very well in person. I don't know how well it's going to translate on the video. But the fabric was just applied to a piece of cardstock and run through the machine, and the paper or the fabric actually takes an impression. And that any of your scraps could be used this way to make a card if you had an embossing machine. Okay. How many of us through the mail get things delivered to our house in a manila folder or manila envelope? One of those things in our workplace, the things that have the string that they wrap around and they reuse them. You can take and cut apart a manila envelope and use that and run it through the machine. Both of these samples were just run through the machine without a base. The envelope itself is thick enough that it takes a really nice impression. And so this is embossed and this is debossed. When I was looking for things to run through the machine, I found a piece of construction paper with my kids' stuff from when they were little kids, and we bought all kinds of construction paper. And this construction paper was already colored with the pastel shades, and I ran it through the machine and it turned out really pretty. It already has color to it. This one is an embossed image. This is a debossed image. Now, every image that we saw prior to this was a piece of material run through the embossing machine in the embossing folder, focusing on either the elevation or the depression of the folder image. At this point, I'm taking images that are embossed, like we just looked at, and showing ways that you can add color simply. These two samples here were just embossed the way all these previous images were embossed. And this one was just colored by dragging a dye ink pad over the surface. And the ink pad will highlight the raised portions of the folder. So you can see this flower here is the same as this flower that you see here. This flower here, only it's highlighted by using the ink pad. This is dragging an ink pad, a dye ink pad, over a debossed image. And in this case, it highlights the background and the elevated portions of the folder. Now, it's interesting because portions of the debossed image that are higher than others will pick up a little bit of the ink, and it just gives it a lot more definition. Okay, I discovered that you could emboss wallpaper. So I had in my crafting room, I had a big sheet of wallpaper, and I cut it down to size and ran it through the machine. Now, because this wallpaper is coated, it doesn't take dye ink the way paper does. But if you use a StazOn pad, which is designed to use on plastic and glass and images that the ink attaches to something that's non-porous, it will dry on wallpaper that's coated. So this is an embossed image and a debossed image that I just dragged the StazOn pad across the surface, and this is how it picked up the ink. Now I tried the same thing with the wallpaper using a dye pad, and the dye pad on the debossed image made a nice effect in the background, but it wasn't drying, so I had to take a tissue and buff it, and it gave this really softened image with color applied to the background. And I think it's really interesting. It's so different. These are both wallpaper with a StazOn pad and the dye pad. Here's the embossed folder where you can see I had to buff it, and the dye ink versus the StazOn. Now this this third row, I embossed the image, and then I took what's called a blender brush, and you rub it on your ink pad, and then you apply it just where you want that color to be. So on the upper and the lower image, I applied color to the flowers here, and down here I applied it to the flowers, and then I used a different color and applied it to the leaves. And then I took a pad and drug it across the surface just like I did in these samples here. And so you end up coloring your flowers with the raised image highlighted with the darker ink, and the flowers, it doesn't matter if you went outside the lines, because the darker ink is going to cover over the lighter ink that you used with your blender brush. I think that makes a pretty sample. Okay, remember when I showed you the labels that I had done before? This is the same thing. The labels were embossed. Here they were debossed. And then you can get your ink in little tiny cubes called Stampin' Spots. They're about 1 inch in diameter, and they're just about the size of these labels. And so you can make a rainbow card by dragging a different Stampin' Spot across one label, and you make kind of a rainbow appearance. And that's what I did with these two cards. It was just my choice of ink color, and one being embossed, the other debossed. Now, if you don't have Stampin' Spots, but you have a blender brush or a sponge dauber, you could control the ink and apply it just to one individual label. But I think that makes a nice rainbow effect, where you take advantage of the fact that they're labels to make your card a rainbow card. Now, these two images were embossed. This one was embossed, this one was debossed. This was a piece of lavender or purple cardstock. This was a piece of white. All I did was color that with markers, just like you would color any image with markers. And here I colored the debossed depression of the flowers with the marker, and then I used a black marker to color in the background. And I think that made a striking image. Here at the top, I didn't bother coloring the background because with the lavender cardstock, I already had a colored background, so I just carefully colored in the raised image of the embossing folder with my different markers. Years ago, I bought rub-ons, which are it gives a metallic look, and you apply them with your finger, and you know, those of us that have had makeup where you put highlighter, you rubbed your finger on the highlighter and dabbed it on your skin. Well, you could do the same kind of thing when you're applying a rub-on. You just, this is a gold rub-on, this is a silver rub-on, this was a red, a green, and you just rub it over the surface, and that's how the color was applied in these two cards. This one was an embossed image, this one was a debossed image. Okay, those of you who are familiar with radiant pearl or pearl powders. It's a mica powder that can be shimmery, and the technique is basically using an embossing pad like Versamark, which is a clear ink, which makes a sticky surface, and then you go back and with a Q-tip or a paintbrush, you apply the mica powder to the area where the ink was, and that's what this is. I used mica powders, which would be the same thing as powdered pearls. I dragged the clear embossing pad over the elevated image on the embossed image, and then just went back and using a paintbrush or a Q-tip, picked up the mica powder and applied it to the flowers. And I don't know whether you can appreciate that on the video, but it's kind of shimmery from the mica. This lower one was the same basic principle, only in this case, I applied the Versamark to the embossed image, and then I used a Q-tip and applied chalk pastels to the raised flowers. Totally, same folder, totally different look. Showing how versatile having one folder and an embossing machine is. It's like there's no limit to what you can do with a machine like this. This image here was colored with watercolor pencils, and then I went back with a brush and just touched up where the pencil marks were so that the watercolor became blended more like a watercolor image, but this was colored with watercolor pencils. This image was an embossed image that I used pigment ink and just took my paintbrush directly to the stamp pad and used it like paint from a pigment ink pad. That's why it's so opaque, because pigment ink is not translucent like dye ink can be. So that's how that image was made. These two here are again an embossed image and a debossed image. They are both colored with similar colors of watercolor, just the kids' watercolor palette. And this background was, of course, a lavender color cardstock. This was white, but that was just plain watercolors. I think that made a pretty image. Okay, now the next section are things that before I embossed the material, I applied color to the cardstock. So these two images, I just took various colors of green ink, dye ink, and rubbed them on the background, creating a color wash, and then just ran it through the machine. And this is just using different shades of greens. This one was an embossed image, this one was a debossed image. I did the same thing here, and I applied the color to a white piece of paper. In the middle, I used a color piece of paper. It was that lavender shade of purple, but I applied purple ink to make a background that had various colors in it. And purple's my favorite color, so I think that this is probably one of my favorite backgrounds that I made with embossed and debossed. This third column, it was the same technique as these two panels. I used the dye ink and directly added it to paper. In both cases, this was white paper. But then after I embossed the image, then I went back and I repeated a technique that we had discussed earlier, where I just took a dark color dye ink and dragged it across the surface. And in an embossed image, it's going to pick up the highlighted, elevated portions of what you ran through the machine. So in this case, it highlighted the flowers. In this example, it was a debossed image, so where the ink attached was the background here, and the high points of the depressions. Like these are all recessed. That was the original color that I swiped on the cardstock before embossing it. And then the dark ink covered over the flat surfaces, which was the background of the pad. Okay, you can color the material that you are using before you run it through the embossing machine. In these 4 examples here, I used alcohol markers. This was a piece of pale pink acetate, and I just colored it solid with different shades of pink and ran it through the embossing folder. Here I took a piece of parchment paper and I colored pinks and purples onto the piece, filling it in solid and running it through the machine. This is a piece of acetate, only this was clear acetate that I colored with the alcohol markers and ran through the machine. And that's a embossed image that's elevated. This is elevated. Here it's elevated. And then this is vellum. I did the same thing. I just colored the vellum in with purple and blue and ran it through the machine. Those of you who have played with card making before might have done a technique called the shaving cream technique. In this case, what you do is you take and make a mound of shaving cream and then you drop reinkers onto it and then you swirl it with a toothpick and you just lay your glossy cardstock into that mound of shaving cream, and when you bring it up, it's going to have an interesting swirly pattern of color on the cardstock, and when it's dry, it's free to emboss. And this was a piece of glossy cardstock that I had done the shaving technique to, and I embossed it, and it made a really interesting image. Now this card kind of reflects the difference between embossing and debossing, because this is called a split card technique, where you take and only put the cardstock halfway into the embossing folder and you emboss it. And so this is a raised image. Then you take it out of the machine, you flip the cardstock over and you rotate it 180 degrees and put half of it back in the machine and run it through. So you have one card front that has half embossed, half debossed. Then you drag the color across and you show the difference between the 2 techniques on the same piece of paper. And that's kind of a fun thing to play with. You can do the exact same thing, only instead of using the same the same pad, if you chose, or same embossing folder, you can choose to use a different pattern. You could choose to use a wood grain or dots or bricks or whatever you have that's different than this first folder that we've been using, and have 2 different embossed images on the same front. And with those, you could choose to either do the embossed or the debossed side, but it's up to your imagination what kind of combination you can make. But this is what's called a split front. These images here is just a different presentation of a different style of split front. In this case, for all 4 of these images, I embossed piece of paper that was purple, and then I embossed a piece of paper that was white. Then I took the white pieces and cut them in half. These I cut vertically, these I cut horizontally. And then just to show when you do this technique, all the options that you have to use. You take your embossed piece of paper and you kind of slide it so that the image locks together, because the flowers that are the same impression are going to lock. You can see this is all the same flower here. So that naturally slid and nested on top of each other where it belonged. This one I left uncolored as white. All I did with this one was drag a black ink pad over the white debossed side, which applied it to the background, and that made a totally different look. Same concept, just totally different look. This one, I used the blender brushes and colored the recessed image with different colors inks, like purple and green and dark purple, and then I ran the black paper over it. And this is this technique plus coloring before you swipe the dark ink. And then here I just chose to color both the white and the purple cardstock with my markers. I I think in this case they're alcohol markers I used, but any marker you could do the same thing. I like the alcohol markers on the colored cardstock because they seem to show up better in my opinion. Now this is the next technique. This is a direct to folder application of ink. You take the side of your embossing folder where the image is raised, and you just drag a pigment ink over the surface of the plastic. And then you lay your cardstock in it and you run it through the machine, and the machine will embed that dye ink into the recessed impressions. And that's how this one was created. Pigment ink does not dry on plastic. You can take that with a toothbrush and some Dawn or whatever dish soap you use and just scrub that folder, or use a baby wipe and scrub that folder, and you'll never know that you applied ink directly to your pad. This next technique is done similarly to this, but it has a step you do in advance. If you have a scoring machine, this card was scored at 1/2 inch intervals on a scoring board. Then you take a wood grained or a wood color dye ink, and you just swipe it parallel to the lines, and it will highlight the raised side of the score line, and it'll leave a little bit of trace of that ink that looks like wood grain. Then for the second step, you go into your embossing folder and you apply ink to the elevated side of the pad, just like we did here, and you run it through the machine, and this gives the image of carved wood, because you got the wood background, and then this looks like this is like burnt into the wood panels, recessed into the wood panels. Now, here is a variation of that technique where it was done just the opposite. This was scored, but instead of using and dragging your ink pad over the elevated score lines, it was drug over the recessed score line, so that the difference between the wood panels appears white instead of dark. And then dragging the pad over there to make the wood grain. And then in this case, you apply the ink with a pad direct to paper, because this was run through the machine so that the image was embossed instead of the previous image here. This was debossed. So this is recessed, this is elevated. And so in this case, the second step is just dragging a darker ink color over the image. And so this has a more raised image. So it looks like raised carved wood instead of recessed carved wood. These three samples were done at the same time. These are done with what's called a wax paper resist. You take a piece of wax paper, like we showed before, you can emboss wax paper, and you run it through the machine by itself. Then you take it and you put it between two pieces of cardstock and you iron it. And the image on one side of the wax paper will transfer to one piece of the cardstock, and the image on the other side of the wax paper will transfer to the other piece of cardstock. So you take a dye ink pad, you got your sandwich here with the wax paper in the middle. You open it up. You apply to that surface, because that's where the wax is, and the ink will attach where there is no, or the ink will attach where there's no wax, and the area that's light is where the wax was. So these kind of are almost a mirror image of each other. This was the same folder run through, showing how the ink applies differently based on where the wax remained. This was the original piece of wax paper that was run through the folder, and you can see the impression on the paper that's left behind. It's very subtle. I'm not sure you can appreciate it on the camera, but these three were the result of running one technique through, and it's called wax paper resist. This one is called letterpress, and in this case, what is done is you drag your pigment ink directly over the folder, but you're going to the recessed side. You're not applying the ink to the elevated side. And then when you run it through the machine, the ink is applied to the background. And here I used white paper and gold. I don't think I applied as much ink as I would have liked because I've seen other people's samples that were far superior to this, but this is the concept. It's called letterpress. Down here, we're using a piece of cardstock that has a white core. Some of our cardstock is solid and some of it has a white core. And in this case, you emboss the cardstock, and then you take a sanding block and you sand the surface until you reveal the white core. So this is called a distressed technique using white core paper. And I think that's a pretty image. Now when I look on this panel, this is the same thing as the gold image, only this time I used black white core paper. And instead of just leaving the white showing, you can take your markers and color the white with color. And that's how that came about. Now, these two images I did using black cardstock. And this is just a simple pigment ink swiped over the surface. Here the gold pigment ink just highlighted the embossed side. Here the gold pigment ink is just on the recessed side. And this is the same concept, only it's using a pastel pigment ink over black paper. But I think anything with black paper like this, it makes a striking image. And that was my last sample. I hope that you had fun looking at my images. I've never been accused of being shy. I know I talked a long time, but if you stayed and watched till the end, then Nancy gets all kinds of minutes on her YouTube channel.
That's right.
I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy what I had to share, then let Nancy know, because the next time I come and visit, I can bring something else and show you another technique. But this was fun for me. I've never done anything like this before, and I thank you if you were able to stay and watch it until the end.
You are definitely a super viewer if you stayed all the way to the end. I appreciate you watching. If you haven't subscribed, I'd love it if you would. Give me a little thumbs up and ring the notification bell. And that way you'll know when my next video comes out. And we'll see you next time. You take care. God bless. Goodbye.
God bless. Bye.